and so many incredible community leaders and friends who have gathered here today to support the signing of what I believe is important legislation that will hopefully make the changes in this city that are necessary to address what we know are inequalities in services, resources in general, and we know as a city we have work to do. In fact, we can take this conversation back to years ago, starting with the unfinished agenda under the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, recommendations back then of what should be done with the disparities that exist in the African American community. Later on down the line, when Gavin Newsom served as mayor, he agreed to work with us and create a task force which produced a report that really highlighted the challenges that continue to persist in the African American community despite changes, despite investments. The same problems that we are talking about today were problems that were highlighted, yet there weren't significant changes made. And growing up in San Francisco, I can't help but wonder, where did we go wrong? What were the mistakes that we made, and how are we gonna push forward the kinds of policies necessary to fix it? One such policy I'm really proud of that I helped to produce when I was on the Board of Supervisors. People tried to fight us on it. People told us it couldn't be done. But thanks to our late Mayor Ed Lee, former Supervisor Malia Cohen, we were able to finally get neighborhood preference legislation passed. And let me give you an example of what a difference that makes. We know the challenges that exist with access to affordable housing. Time and time again, we get asked to support affordable housing in our communities. But when the time comes to move into that housing, the people who grew up there, the folks still crowded up in their houses, living with their mamas and grandmamas, could not get access to those units. The first project where we were able to use neighborhood preference was the Willie B. Kennedy Apartments. And because of our efforts, 40% of the 98 units went to people who lived in the community first. And in fact, roughly 23 of those residents were African Americans from that community. Now, we understand that it may seem like a small number, but in comparison to the number of African Americans who would get access to affordable housing, it is a big deal that we were able to accomplish this. But we know that there's so much more work to be done. Because when you look at the disparities that exist in San Francisco, sadly, the numbers are clear. High school dropouts, disproportionately African Americans are in the higher numbers of dropouts and suspensions, but less than 6% of the population. You look at the homeless population, you look at the challenges with mental health, disproportionately African Americans are impacted by that. You look at access to housing and a number of other issues. I mean, the list goes on, and I get that we are looking at an Office of Racial Equity for the purposes of dealing with challenges that exist with minority communities, but let's face the facts. Sadly, time and time again, we have seen on many occasions the African American community lose time and time and time again. So we can't just keep talking about these statistics and saying that we care about what happens in this community, and then also criticize me when I deliberately put money and resources into supporting and targeting this community so that we can really provide the change that we need. We need action. We need consistency. We need a change like never before. And the Office of Racial Equity is really about making that investment. It's about saying that we are tired of the reports, we are tired of the promises, and we need to start putting our money where our mouth is on this issue and so many other issues. And so I just want to take this opportunity to thank again Supervisor Sandy Fewer and Supervisor Vallie Brown for their courage, for being leaders, for being unrelenting, for consistently talking about this, talking about the need to make real change. The African American community may be less than 6% of the population of this city, but guess what? We're still here. We still matter. And it's time that we come together and make real change. It's time that we come together and hold one another accountable, but also lift one another up. And here is our opportunity to work with an office to provide that change. And so I know I went over my time, but the fact is I'm excited about this. It's why we put money in the budget to make sure that the positions are funded. Nobody debated whether or not it should be. And now it's time that we continue to work with this office so that policy is brought forward, so that more investments are brought forward, and so that everyone in this city and all city departments understand. When I say we are going to look at everything through a lens of equity and make the kinds of deliberate changes and investments to address what we know has been a problem, then that's exactly what we're going to do. So at this time, I'd like to welcome up to provide remarks Supervisor Sandra Lee Fewer.
Thank you, Mayor Breed. I am so proud to stand here today with the mayor and Supervisor Brown and also my colleagues and all of you as we sign this legislation to create an Office of Racial Equity into law. I am a fourth-generation San Franciscan Chinese American, and I remember growing up in San Francisco where there was more opportunity for everyone. I remember when we had an African American population of over 13% here in San Francisco. I remember a time when we had neighborhoods with small businesses that were owned by African Americans and thriving. This is a very important moment today because, quite frankly, this is one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, that I actually ran for supervisor. I think that it is so delightful and refreshing that we have a mayor that actually embraces this, that we need an interruption. We need actually now to interrupt what is happening, and how can we get back to the San Francisco values that we all are so proud of and that we love. When you come to San Francisco, you expect to see diversity. When you come to San Francisco, the self-proclaimed most progressive city in the United States, you expect to see people of color thriving here, and yet we are not seeing that. I'd like to take a moment of appreciation to really thank my legislative aide, Chelsea Bollard, for doing this work. And also District 5 legislative aide, Shakira Simley. And from the Human Rights Commission, Brittany Chikata and Zoe Polk. This is the hard work of 4 determined women who said, we are going to write this and we're going to write it good. This country has a long history of racial injustice, beginning with the genocide of Native peoples and the enslavement of African Americans. And in San Francisco, historic race-based discrimination has manifested as exclusionary and destructive policies like creating obstacles for Chinese residents from owning businesses, the racial segregation of the neighborhoods through redlining, the internment of Japanese Americans, and the destruction of historically Black neighborhoods in the name of urban renewal. Now, racial injustice appears differently. It is not in explicitly exclusionary policies, but rather in the inaction of our government to address and correct these past harms done. In that way, it is more insidious, more dangerous, and harder to address. We see now incredible racial disparities in so many areas of life, impacting most acutely the Black residents of San Francisco, but also Latinx, Pacific Islander, Asian, Arab, and Native communities. We see these disparities showing up in employment, our schools, housing, the housing market, the criminal justice system, healthcare, and more. These disparities prevent people of color in our city from leading lives that are happy, healthy, and economically secure. But today, we are taking a stand in San Francisco to say San Francisco will not stand for systemic racism. This legislation is a critical step in acknowledging the history and the current conditions of communities of color and making strong and concrete commitment to addressing those conditions. And I am so proud to celebrate its passage with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Feuer. Now at this time, the co-author of the legislation, Supervisor Vallie Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Breed, for your support and kind words. I want to thank Supervisor Feuer and Director Davis for your fierce advocacy and hard work on this. But I also really appreciate the people behind us, and a lot of times we push them in front, that have really got into the weeds to work on this. My aide, Shakira Assembly, thank you. I know Supervisor Feuer already thanked you, but I have to thank all of you too. You have to have a double thanks here. District 1 aide, Chelsea Bullard. Yes. And then the Human Rights Commission. I want to thank Brittany Chiquata. And please, yes, raise your hand, Brittany. Thank you. Everybody wants to know who she is. And other than the other HRC staff that worked really hard on this, they really went deep and really drafted some amazing legislation for us to move forward. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us here today for this historic signing of this our first Office of Racial Equity. This office will work on the legacy. This office will build and work on the legacy of the Human Rights Commission, and is a powerful tool to break down years and years of structural and institution racism. Our work has just begun, though. But we can do this. We can't do this alone, and that's why we're all here today. We need the support of each of you to repair past harms and work towards a brighter future. It's all about time. It's all about time. And I am so proud to stand on the Ramaytush Ohlone land that we are here on and organize on behalf of the board. I mean, when I think about the Native American community in this city, the highest population of women that are murdered are American Indians. Think about that. When they say we're 1%, why? Why? This is something that I know we're going to dive deep into because these are things that matter to our community, matter to the city, matter to the elected officials. And, you know, as the years when I was a legislative aide, we used to do policy, we used to do funding, thinking we were really going to help a community, but we really didn't know if it was going to work or not. And for me, this Office of Racial Equity, it will work with the community and bring things to us. Isn't that the way we want? Don't we want the community to bring the policy, bring the funding suggestions to us? It has to come from the community, not from us telling you what you need. So I'm just really proud to stand here today and be part of this. And lastly, I just want to make an important distinction. Equality means treating everyone the same. Equity means ensuring that everyone has what they need to be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Now, a few words from the Director of the Human Rights Commission here in San Francisco, Cheryl Davis.
You know, this is really quite an emotional day. for a lot of different reasons. I want to first recognize the commissioners that are here, Commissioner Swice, Commissioner Clopton, and Commissioner LaDuca from the Human Rights Commission. This work, I was just telling someone, is actually just the perfect storm in terms of how it came out. I remember when Mayor Breed was president of the board, we had a conversation with James Bell from the Burns Institute in Oakland about the need to do something around racial equity. She was committed then. We were really trying to figure out what it is that we wanted to do, what did we need to do, how did we really work to build allyship to move this forward. When Supervisor Fuhrer came into office, one of the first things she said to me is, we need to do something around racial equity in this city. And she specifically said, I want to know what we can do to do better by African Americans and Black people in San Francisco. That was unusual, right? This idea that somebody who wasn't Black was interested in doing right by Black people was new for me. And then Supervisor Brown developed an equity program with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Joaquin Torres, specifically for African Americans in the Western Addition of Fillmore to help them develop the way to have access to City Hall, like put money for them to get paid to tell us what to do. When we talk about being committed to the work, I really have little tolerance for people who just like to talk. And I want to say that these three women have been committed to the idea and notion of racial equity and getting to the people who have been most harmed by the disparities and putting their money and their mouth where the work needs to be done. And I say it's a perfect storm because when I look around and I think about Felicia Jones and Dante King and the folks who have been pushing on the inside to say that we need to make change, Michelle and Cheryl, the folks who have challenged us. But at the same time, I think about Ruth from BACR and Roadmap to Peace and the work and the mission, Auntie John and Patsy and the work that's being done with the Samoan community. This idea that we want to transform City Hall is not about transforming the work that happens in this building. It's about understanding how the work that happens in this building impacts everybody outside.
So stay woke.
So stay woke, as Childish Gambino would say. I am so full right now because I know that there is not just the accountability and the demand to make this happen from community, but these three women, coupled with the men over here from the Board of Supervisors, they're going to make it happen. Nobody here is afraid to be told that it's being done wrong and that we need to redo it. So if you want it to work right, you all need to make sure that we are held accountable, and I'm excited about what's to come and being held accountable and moving this thing forward. And as Mayor Breed said, bringing the change that we've been waiting for 50, 60, 70, 100 years. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. As I said to all of you before, as someone who was born and raised here, I'm so honored to be the mayor and still can't believe what an incredible opportunity this is. But I can't also help but think about the need to make sure that even though there were mistakes that were made in the past, it changed the dynamics of our city. In the past, we have an opportunity to make things better in the future. We have an opportunity not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And no, I can't turn back the hands of time. But what I can do is make sure that the policies and the investments and the decisions that we make now have a better impact on future generations to come. And today is an opportunity to do just that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this legislation signed. Are we ready? Yes.